the presenter for today, Professor Victor Bunaya Okori. Professor Okori, over to you.
Thank you very much. This is the subject before us. In open comment, we have a building. It must be here is a metaphor of building that if you think of your writing as a building, then you should be thinking of your title as a roof. And it being a roof, it must be able to cover everyone who is under that roof. And you must not have a leaking roof. A leaking roof is not allowed. Nobody would like to stay under a leaking roof. And if we want to think of it as an umbrella, I want you to imagine the apex of an umbrella. The apex of umbrella will represent the title. And being the title, you will see that every other aspect of the text is connected to that apex. So your writing must be within the apex. It must not go outside it. So the title is very, very important when we think further, because it is what gives the first impression about your work. It is also what invites people to your work. I remember we did a particular work and we gave this work different titles. And after giving it different titles, we found out that responses of the audience varied. It was a common title that we did and nobody seems to pay attention. We wrote a paper which we called Towards Effect Agricultural Extension Service Delivery, an Introduction. We posted it online. Nobody cared about that article. But because it's a chapter of a book, so we were just experimenting with marketing. I decided to now change the same article and I wrote Towards Effective Agricultural Extension Service Delivery in Post-Colonial Nigeria, a Prolegomenon. And I can tell you that within one day, the view jumped from 20 people to a total of 250 within one day. Now, a week coming, we saw it hitting as many as 25,000 viewers. Just mere removing introduction, replacing it with a Prolegomenon instead of saying an introduction. Now, because we were writing to academic audience, those who are in philosophy, they wanted to see how people in agriculture talks about Prolegomenon. Prolegomenon simply means an introduction of a book. I could have said an exodium, still talking the same thing. So the title is a selling that markets the work you are presenting. And of course, it is important because it's what it gets seen in the search engine. So it signals the content to your peers and also brings it into the search engine. And of course, you can be sure that it influences editorial and reviewers' perception. There are some articles when you see the title, as a reviewer, you will feel very, very constrained to reject it. You will see how you will work it. It is you want it to be in your journal. You want, when people see this title, they will want to read it. So just as our sponsor, if you see those books that we're talking, they need article that can sell. And I can tell you that title will be a game changer. Now, what are the characteristics of a good title? Number one, it must have core concept. Two, it has to be precise, communicative, clear. And it must contain key words as well as being catchy. Your title must be catchy. Then, as a curator informed us, we must strike a balance between making it what Americans we call sensationalism, how you balance between the two, being factual and at the same time being fanciful. So between facts and fancy, there must be a delicate balance, and we must do that. What then are the common title structures? Now, you can see that a title can be descriptive, it can be indicative, and it can also be compound. That is when you make a combination. And it may be interrogative. Can we have this question quickly? I have just brought the title of the invitation I received. Now, those of us online, please, I want you to quickly answer this question. What type of title is this? That is the first question. Just know the question, you supply your answer later. And that title I have there is Formulating Researchable and Impactful Title for High Visibility Scientific Publication. The common problems or the common title structures. We've seen that there are 4 types. It can be descriptive, it can be indicative. Example of descriptive title is social media usage among teens. Indicative one is exploring the role of social media in teenage identity. Compound is a typical scene in social media and teenage identity, exploring the online self. Interrogative title will be saying, how does social media shape teenage identity? These are typical that people can use. And I have an assignment which we are going to do later. What then are the common title problems? I've just identified 5 here. Number 1 is too vague or too broad. Example of a vague title is Exploring Social Interaction Across the World. If you see a title of this nature, Exploring Social Interaction Across the World. Of course, use of acronyms in the title at times may be problematic, and some title may be too long or too wordy. Titles that do not align with paper content is typical of many writings we see when we are reviewing. You see a situation where somebody is cut off the head of a sheep to put on the body of a goat, or to go and take the head of a lion and put on the body of a lamb. So that type of titles exist and we must avoid them. Now, I have an example of poorly written and the improved title. We can see that some titles, example of poorly written title is A Study of Social Media Dynamics. Improved form of that title we read, Social Media Use and Mental Health Among University Students in Nigeria. Another poorly written title sounds like this, Climate Change Issues. A better written title we read, Local Response to Climate Change in the Niger Delta. These are just examples. But then the main issue that I want to really talk about today is what I call the commandments or the laws that governs writing for scientific papers. I call it here crafting titles that maximize scientific visibility and impact. The first law we have here is the law of concept mapping. Basically, concept mapping is like a graphical representations of various related terms and terminology relevant to the major concept. Because concept in every paper is divided into 2, the major concept and the minor concept. A proper concept mapping is required because that will form the basis of getting a good keywords. If we must have good keywords, you must do proper concept mapping, and you'll form the basis of generating what we call the subtitles. We've seen papers that when you review, you find out that the subtitles, some of them may even be completely irrelevant, or you'll be suggesting to scholars, why not add this concept, create another subtitle and write on this. That paper simply suffers from poor concept mapping. So there must be proper concept mapping for us to make a good paper. The second one is the law of context. We must properly understand the context we are writing. For instance, context can be defined in terms of geography. It can be a particular category of people, like you say, among adolescents. You say in sub-Saharan Africa. These are issues of context. Women in Nigeria, that's the issues of context. That's the law of context. Very, very important for those writing. The next one is what we call the consumer's law. That is law number 3. The consumer's law here basically refers to the audience. Are we writing for the lay people? Are we writing for the policy makers? Are we writing for fellow researchers, students, or politicians? Don't forget that in science, you have to communicate across these 5 categories of audiences. If you are writing like the paper that I just illustrated to you, when we wrote a chapter of a book, we said towards effective extension service delivery in Nigeria, an introduction. Nobody looked at it because that book was basically meant for academia, those who are doing research. But immediately we just said towards effective extension service delivery in Nigeria, a Prolegomenon. All the researchers, many of them wanted to see what is a Prolegomenon. So when you are writing, certainly that type of title is completely nonsense if you are sending it as a policy brief. So in talking about the law of consumers, you must know when you are writing a policy brief, it's different from when you are writing a scoping review. It's different from when you are writing a systematic review. It's different from when you are writing, a complete article that is basically meant for your colleagues who knows the Y, the X like you. But when you are writing for the politicians, you are want to publish maybe in the Journal of Nigerian National Assembly, hoping that your senior president and others will read it. Certainly, you write very, very simple for them to be able to flow with you. You will drop your jargon. To illustrate the law of consumers, this is another assignment which we are going to do. Simply, we have a list of titles, and we are asking that we should now share this title according to the audience. So when you get it, look at the titles we have here and tell me who among these audiences should get each of these paper. Is it a policy brief? Is it policy brief for advocacy? Remember, policy brief for advocacy will be different from your scientific writing. An example is done here. What we call this one is from water to oil, or from oil to water. The deepening crisis of primitive accumulation in Nigeria's Niger Delta waterscape. Now, we can rewrite the same title, From Oil to Water, addressing the escalating resources crisis in the Niger Delta's waterscape. Another one is also here, Priorities for Strengthening Effective Extension Service Delivery in Post-Colonial Nigeria. So when you get it, friends, let's address that. That is the law of consumer, law 3. Let's go to law number 4, creativity, the law of creativity. Now, we must balance between facts and fancy. Fancy is equally what makes article attractive. If you look at the most cited article in Google Scholar, that article is simply the impact of internet on research. Now, why is it the most cited article I've asked? If you check the Google Scholar database, now it is the most cited because of novelty. The impact of internet, let me just say, for here in Nigeria, where we can now begin to talk of it as becoming very, very commercial, beginning from great thanks to Obasanjo's administration that brought GSM and allow everybody now to begin to get hold of it in a way that it become massive. And with other things that brought in more access to mobile network. And that made it possible for people down to be, a bit creative in their writing, in accessing information. And if you check the promotion criteria, it have changed. We have gotten a lot of changes in terms of quantum required before the advent of internet. So that article, the beauty of it is that it was timely, and up to today, we are still having the impact of internet. An example is this very platform that we have before us. So the law of creativity is law number 4. We come to law 5, the law of clarity. Clarity is the most important thing. If you are writing, avoid anything that is dense and make it very plain. Even those who have visions are encouraged to make it plain, so that whosoever reads it may run. Of course, the next one is the law of consultation. I think we must learn how to consult, and we are told that 2 heads are better than 1. And this time I want to add, including the virtual head. It is allowed in the scientific community for you to make use of AI to reframe your titles. I'm not saying you should go to AI directly and copy titles. But when you have a title, you can ask it to help me reframe. But don't make use of one only. There are many types. You can use GPT, you can use Copilot, and so many. Now put the same title in all these softwares. Get their own input. Now use it, collect from here, collect from there, create a most compelling title for yourself and for your project. That is the law of consultation. And of course, you can share with your peers and you can share with your friends. Then next one here is what we call the law of conformity. Now, the law of conformity is that you must conform to the dictates of your journal that you want to publish in. And all these laws I have mentioned, the 7 laws, can be subsumed in 2 main laws, what we call the law of PICO and the law of keys. Now, the law of PICO is simply that a good title should have what we call the population, the intervention, the context, and the outcome. If you pick any title, especially for those of us who are writing systematic review, you'll find out that it is one of the criteria that you can use to admit a title? Does it have a population? Is it talking about intervention? Is it talking about what context is it talking? And I have explained context here to be maybe sub-Saharan Africa, okay, maybe among adolescents, a certain group of people. There must be a defined and identifiable individual. If it's in engineering, I know some of us have engineering background here. In engineering, you can have still a way of connecting your work to this framework. There are quite other framework when they come in analyzing titles. You can use the spider framework and so many. Then the principle or the law of keys simply says, keep it short and simple. That's the law of keys. Keep it short and simple. I've said that content is important, and in content, we must capture the core concept. With the core concept, you'll be able to do concept mapping and derive the sub-concepts. Then make sure we define our scope. A title should define the scope, who, where, and when. And of course, we must do it such that we are able to generate key terms or search words. What we now put as what? The keywords that will be used for what? Indexing. And journals we recommend. I say we must be able to balance the tone. That is to make sure that we have the facts and also the fancy. It must be informative, but also engaging. And we must also conform to the norms of the journals we want to publish. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open and I'm ready for your questions.
I'm going to open the floor, but something striking my mind when Prof was presenting. Most of us, when we finalize our thesis and we want to do the oral defense, I pick a point from there that the title of our work, I coin it as the first and the last. What I mean by the first is that it is the first thing you have before you start writing all your research work. But I also notice that it is also the last, because that title is not finalized until the external examiner looks at it. That means a title is so important because you have used it as a working title, you have finished your work, but at the end of the day, when an external person look at that, no, the title is not actually as it has been written. And that tells us how important it is. I'm going to open the floor for questions.
I have a simple question. Like you said, we have particular topics for different write-ups like policy brief, research work, journal publications. Now, my question is this. If you are doing a research work and you have a topic, after the work and you are drawing a policy brief from it, will that policy brief now have a different topic from the research work, or will it still carry the same topic with the research work?
I want to just ask, which of them is of utmost importance? You set a title to get it accepted, probably to go for review, but then in the course of review, your title can be edited to reflect the wishes of the editor.
Okay.
Now, is it ethically sound to adjust that title again or request for adjustment, noting that eventually becomes the title? Would that probably give you more visibility compared to your initial position of getting a catchy title for the paper to be first reviewed and accepted?
So I want to ask, those characteristics that you gave us of a good title, does it apply to education also? Because when we are being taught about title in education, they gave us that the title must have some variables, the dependent and independent variables, and some other variables too. Yeah. So I don't know if it applies all to education. Thank you very much, sir.
My previous knowledge about title is just to have the core parts and the focus or the direction. Those are the two major elements. Just like the question that was asked before now, that is when the variables come in to give our core part of the title direction. But today, it changed that totally, talking about the scope, which is still the same thing as the direction, but it now brought in fact and fancy. He said the title should be informative and engaging. And that engaging, that is where we generate reactions among researchers so that they can actually make contribution or criticize our work further. And he said we must conform to the destination of our write-up or work. My own question is, what do you say about including rider in title? Some people don't like it. In fact, using subtopic, that is what I mean by rider. I have the topic and I use subtopic. I had a boss then that don't want to see anything like rider. So what do you say to that, sir?
Thank you. I will add to it that where is rider topics? Where is it relevant among those areas that we identify, descriptive and the rest? Over to you, Professor Okori.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by commending, I go straight to Dr. Ume from Abia State, Umudike. Yes, she's asking, in fact, let me assume that you have an ROF grant and you have used a particular grant title. You now get the grant money and you have executed. Now you are writing your report and you are making publication from it. So must everything now be with the policy brief be different from what
the original research title?
Yeah, from the original research. Where the point is here is that there are, when we are writing grant titles, you know, some of them does not really conform to what a journal wants. Some of them may be too large. And remember, you wrote those titles when you did not have your data. Now that you have data, now that you have engaged literature, what has changed? In fact, it is recommended that your title should even be influenced, if possible. That's why you see some people, they have been asked to modify their title by external examiners. So, for instance, we have quite a change of grant here running. You know, we did a grant on COVID, and we have written 4 different papers with different titles from the same paper. Now, that said, but let me come to zero in on policy brief. Now, as you are going to see on the slide that contains the assignment, where we looked at a typical example, where we now wrote this very example here. Now, look, listen to this title. Assuming now that the policy brief is meant for policymakers, and policymakers, they are not as learned as you are. They are not egghead. So now you gave them this type as your policy brief towards effective extension service delivery in post-colonial Nigeria. A Prolegomenon. Then I now decided to write my policy brief as this: policy priorities for strengthening effective, for ensuring effective extension service delivery in post-colonial Nigeria. Now you can see that when I'm addressing policy makers, I use words that they are familiar with. A Prolegomenon is meant for people in philosophy. Typical those do emphy, you know. They will be interested on what Kant has said on this matter. So when you are writing, the people you are considering here is a target audience. If you want to write the paper that you want to give to UNICEF, maybe on nutrition, it will be different from the paper that you are submitting for, you know, maybe another Journal of Youth and Child Studies. So the target audience decide. It's not that it's going to be completely different, but it's going to remove some of academic jargons that doesn't carry any relevance in the policy world, or that they may not be familiar with. If you go and put an exodium, okay, an exodium simply means an introduction. Now, who in the National Assembly, we have time to go and be looking for the meaning of an exodium? But people in academics will like to learn new things, so they will be carried away by that. So the advice is that when you are writing a policy brief, let it be as layman was as possible. Now, between what editors want and what a scholar wants, some of us have seen this so many times. You are fighting even to include a concept which will allow the work to be in your discipline, and an editor is rejecting it because they are looking at what they want to sell. You see, in that context, you have a choice, okay? If publishing it is what you want, okay? One of our professors here, Professor Sonaya, who has just retired, he will say that, for me, even if you have stolen this idea that I have, I will still generate another one. So don't allow fighting with editor to withhold your publication, because they are the gatekeepers and they are seeing perhaps what you are not seeing. The point is that at times we claim that we see, but those editors, some of us have been opportune to be one, okay? They are seeing the market and they are also conforming to politics. I must agree with you that there is politics of authority when it comes in publications. Even when we edit, you are a co-editor. The chief editor is saying this, the co-editor is saying the other one. In fact, I received a kind of scary message from this Journal of Political Economy that is based in UK. They wrote me and said that my paper split editorial board. Now, one of my paper caused trouble in editorial board, that 50% were against the paper and 50% were ready to fight and insist that that paper must be published. Now, how do I balance that? Okay, I just have to now see how I try to balance between the facts and the fancies. And of course, the paper is out there. The deepening crisis of primitive accumulation. Let me come to my dear friend, Damola. You were asking, is all these things applicable to education? That in education, we are told to bring in all the variables, dependent and independent variable must be shown in the title. You are quite correct. You see, your title must have all those things, but then it must be streamlined to the main issue. Let's take, for instance, I give you a title here: the impact of cell phone use on academic performance of in-school SS3 students. Okay, this title has all the things that you want to see. The impact of cell phone use on academic performance. Now, we can see the dependent variable and independent variable clearly captured. Now, I can as well write this title now, and it will still have those components. I will say what I have given you now is descriptive title. Okay, I may decided to bring in exploratory mode, and if I'm to do that, I will say exploring the effects of cell phone use on academic performance among SS3 students in Ijebode Grammar School. Now, I can as well put it in interrogative format. I can say academic performance, does cell phone use count? I'm still talking the same title. I have taken them through the 4 types of titles that we find. Yes, that comes to what our chief host is talking about, Glint Plus. Glint Plus, my dear friend Michael, is asking about focus and duration, facts and fancy. How do we really work on it? We are told to state our main focus and our duration. And here, we are talking about balancing between facts and fancy, and perhaps I may add fissions. You see, what is important is that if you check the traditional people, the traditional writers, they are the one that seems to be in love with descriptive titles, which is title that does not have a colon in between. Those ones are what we call descriptive titles. You don't have colon in between. Now, those traditional writers, there are quite so many of them. And if you look at the most cited article in this database, Google Scholar, it does not have colon, but not to say that it is completely out of place to have a compound. Compound titles are those ones that have colon in between. Okay, like when I say social media and the teenage identity, exploring the online self. This one has colon. Okay, the descriptive format of it will be assessing the impact of social media on online identity among them. I put a certain population. So the traditional writers, they forbid, they hate it with utmost disdain. But those who call the stylists, which are coming from the stylistic linguistics, they are in love with all these sexy way of representing titles. Like one of the most cited article in economics is this guy's paper, the guy who wrote Tying Odyssey to the Marx, removing the con in economics. Okay. So those type of writers too, the stylists, they like when you make it to be fanciful, and it is just to increase attention to see how he can gain visibility.
I want to believe that we have learned one or two things, and it has strengthened what we already know. All of us are from different backgrounds, but I'm happy from the perspective where the speaker is coming from, because it's a general perspective where wherever discipline you are coming from, whatever your background is, you need to be magnanimous. You need to also know that titles can take different forms. There are some journals, if you give them a title that has colon, forget, it will not scale through. They'll tell you to go and work it in a manner that the colon just vanishes. And I was so excited when one of the presenters' paper splitted the editorial board. I think some of us have had such similar issues before, and we can always dance around it and be sure that we get the best and ensure that our titles are appropriate and, you know, very relevant to the particular audience which we are writing for.